For attending the PUSD College and Career Showcase. My name is Carly Wardwell. I'm one of the counselors at Poway High School, and I'll be the moderator for today. Today we have Nick from Salve Regina, and he's going to give us a presentation on how to win people over in an interview. Just a couple of reminders, this session is being recorded. We ask that everyone keeps themselves muted unless otherwise asked. Feel free to use the chat and we'll have time at the end for questions. So Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Carly. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining tonight. I'm Nick Albanese with Salve Regina University. I am an alumnus of Salve, so I graduated back in 2012. I have been working in admissions ever since, and in 2015, I actually moved out to the West Coast. So I am based right in San Diego, and I work with all of our students and families that are interested in attending Salve Regina University. Just a quick note about Salve, it's a small liberal arts university with just over 2,000 undergraduate students. We have more than 60 majors, Division III athletics. We're Catholic, founded by the Sisters of Mercy, open to all backgrounds and beliefs, and we believe in having a transformative student experience where you feel empowered to make the world around you a little bit better, or as we say in our mission statement, a little more just, harmonious, and merciful. So today we're going to talk about, why should you interview, how to prepare for the interview. We'll talk about strategies for some of the common interview questions that you may receive. We'll give you some tips for having a successful interview. Talk about ways to follow up, give you some resources, and if we have time for all of that, we'll also talk a little bit about how families can support you through the interview process, and we'll definitely save some time for questions at the end. Please feel free to type questions at any point in the chat. I might not see them right away, but we'll definitely get to them at the end of the presentation. So, why should you interview? What is the purpose of these interviews? So from my perspective on the college side, when I think about why we want to offer students the ability to interview, when I look at an application, I have a lot of quantitative information about you. I have your transcript, I have your GPA, I have a little bit of qualitative information. I have your essay, letters of recommendation, a list of your activities, but sometimes I feel like I'm missing a little bit of context. Some applications feel super complete, and I could almost envision the student without ever meeting them. But there are other applications where it would be useful if I could have a chance to interact with the student. At colleges like Salve, admissions recruiters conduct these interviews, and then we actually are also the ones that read your application if you decide to apply. So it's super useful for me to be able to put a face to the name when I'm reading an application. And from your perspective as a student, this is an opportunity for you to really reflect on your values, your goals, what you want to get out of the college experience. Sometimes it's not until we question why we're doing something that we really understand what the meaning of all of it is. If I were to ask you, why are you going to college? Would you say, oh, it's because everyone in my community is doing it, right? I mean, hopefully you'd have a bit more of a complex answer. And so this is a good opportunity for you to think about why you are going and be able to articulate that and put it into some short statements. This is a way for you to personalize that admissions process, to add a little bit of that qualitative influence. We're all human beings on the admissions side. We try to, be as neutral as possible. We try to kind of step back and use rubrics, and we test those things with our other counselors when we evaluate applicants. But at the end of the day, we're human beings, and impressions can carry weight, especially if you are quote unquote on the bubble, you're kind of on the border of being admitted. If I have to go to committee, if I have to try to fight for my student to be admitted, it's so useful for me when I've actually had a chance to speak to them and get that context about them and be able to have a bit of armor going into that admissions meeting. Admissions counselors want to admit students, so we want the best information to be able to make those decisions and to advocate for you. So how do you prepare for this interview? My kind of rule of thumb for interviews when students are thinking about it, I think sometimes the gut reaction is to try to prepare in such a way that, you want to be able to, know who's interviewing you and, be able to be like the ideal candidate. But the reality is, you're never going to know what someone is looking to hear, and all you can do is present the best version of yourself. You want to be authentic. If you're not being authentic, that's going to shine through. But my caveat here is you want to be what you're like on your best day. We all have days that maybe we're not as proud of. Maybe we didn't. Conduct ourselves as we would like to. Maybe we, weren't as thoughtful that day or self-reflective. So you want to show what you're like on your best day. So part of that is knowing yourself. We find that it's pretty useful if you start by writing some kind of resume, or just some kind of document where you can organize points of pride about yourself. This will help you to reflect on what were some of your best accomplishments in high school? What are you really proud about? What are some skills you've learned in high school? And how have you built upon those skills? How have you changed as a person through your experience in high school? So we find that it's useful to have that resume, and that resume might be useful for other things as well. Maybe you're applying to a job, and you want some summer employment, so that can be useful there too. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a very formal resume. It can just be sort of like a list of these points of pride. You're going to be doing much of these things when you fill out the common application, such as the activity section. So this is just kind of a way to get started on that, especially if you're listening to this and you're in a younger grade, like before senior year. Know your fit. So research that college that you're applying to. Try to get a sense of where your academic averages fall in comparison to that college's averages. A big part of that is doing some research on the admissions website, asking your counselor. They might have access to that information. And that's also a good question to ask when you're in the interview, like what were the averages last year and how might I compare? I know at Salve, when we conduct interviews, we actually allow students to bring a copy of their transcript so that we can kind of look it over and get a sense of your academic context. Like we can have that information right in front of us, and that can be helpful when we conduct the interview. But kind of just being able to talk about your transcript, to talk about where were some areas where you may have struggled a little bit and why. So if you were looking at that transcript and you saw a C, you would be able to kind of say, oh, well, this is kind of why I had that C. Maybe there was some, tumultuous times going on at home, or, maybe it was COVID related. Maybe you needed to improve upon your study strategies that earlier year in high school. Maybe you had an undiagnosed learning difference, and after getting the diagnosis, you were able to really adapt to that academic environment, and then you can kind of point out those courses in that subject in later years and how you improve. So know what your transcript looks like and how it might appear to someone outside of your school. Be mentally prepared. So you want to kind of know what you're walking into. Think about the format of the interview, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. And that kind of goes along with being physically prepared. So we already talked about making that resume with knowing yourself. Read it over. Maybe ask other folks in your family to think about your accomplishments as well. Think about some moments through your high school experience where you really experienced growth, and see if that is appearing on that resume that you create. Knowing that fit. So think about your academic, your social, and your financial fit with the institution. For that academic research, we kind of talked a little bit about how you can find that out. The social research, YouTube, social media, visiting the campus, those are all great ways to get a sense of that. And if you can if you can find a few clubs that you would connect with, knowing the names of organizations is really useful. It's going to show that person who's interviewing you that you've done your research. So, for example, at Salve, we have the Female Empowerment Organization. And so if I was talking to a student and they talked about how they're involved in a similar club in high school, and they were looking at Salve and they saw that we had that club and they wanted to know more about it, that would really impress me that they took that extra time to, kind of look up specifics like that about us. And the financial fit, you can do what's called a net price calculator. So that might give you, kind of a ballpark estimate of where you fall. There might be information about specific scholarships that you may qualify at that school. So you may want to have some questions ready related to that. Keeping in mind, though, that most admissions counselors are separate from financial aid counselors. So we can answer basic questions, but a lot of the time you do need to go through the financial aid process in order to really get a lot of that sorted. We talked about knowing the averages. So being mentally prepared. So you want to know what setting and kind of strategize based on that setting. Is it an on-campus interview? Is it off-campus? Is it virtual? Because these are all going to be a little bit different. If it's on campus, hopefully there'll be good directions about where to park, where you're going. So a lot of that will be planned in advance. So you can show up early, be on time, be ready for that. You may interview with an admissions counselor, but you could also be interviewing maybe with a current student or another representative of that office. So just be prepared for different types of folks that might be interviewing you. If it's an off-campus interview, you really want to make sure that you understand where the location is. If it's a Starbucks, is it a Starbucks inside of a mall, or is it right on the road? You want to make sure that you give yourself enough time to park, to get there, to get yourself situated, so you're not stressing and kind of ending up getting there a little bit late because you didn't realize exactly where that location was. So just definitely confirm details like that if it's an off-campus interview. And if it's a virtual interview, you can show up much sooner to the start time, really just a few minutes before, because the person's probably not even going to let you in if you're there super early. But really try to make sure that you've tested your internet, that you're using the same device that you're testing that internet on when you do the interview, that you have a decent setup, that there's not likely to be distractions during that time, loud noises in the background, that your background behind you is an appropriate background. We're not seeing, folks like running around. Now, I understand that some of that is not always in everyone's control. But, if you know that you've got the interview coming up, do all that you can to make that space work to your favor. You might also be able to talk to your school counselor about using the school if the interview is like right after school time, and that might be an option as well. But we can ask Carly at the end if that's something that you're able to do. Also kind of think about the format of the interview. So, most interviews are one-on-one. So, it's the interviewer and you. But an on-campus interview, there's a chance that it could be a group interview. Those are definitely, rarer. I would say that you're probably more likely to have a group interview if it's something like a scholarship interview, maybe not the traditional admissions interview, but with a group interview, the dynamics are going to be a bit different. You're going to be kind of playing off of one another. You maybe want to have one or two examples of answers to questions in your back pocket when the question's asked, so that if someone else, asks a similar question, you have that like second example ready to go. And again, like kind of just knowing your host, there's differences between admissions reps, student interviews, alumni interviews. If it's an alumni, you're probably going to have more luck asking them about their experience. Same thing with students. But for students, you can ask them about their specific major if that lines up. If not, maybe just how they chose their major, kind of questions like that. And then, of course, the admissions counselor can give you, better information about your academic context, how you applied, compare with the averages, and be able to talk about, more specifics of the admissions process. And then finally, that, being physically prepared part, read those interview instructions. A lot of times students don't always read them. Even if it says that it's not an evaluative interview, meaning that it's not going to count towards the process, if you have the opportunity to do the interview, if the school is giving you that opportunity, chances are it's going to sway things in some way in some scenarios. So treat it seriously, treat it like it's evaluative, even if it's not. It's helpful, I think, to have supporting documents with you. Don't like shove them upon the interviewer, if they're not required, or ask for. But I think it is helpful to kind of come with a folder and have a copy of your transcript. If you're applying for an art major, maybe having a copy of your portfolio or something like that, especially if you're interviewing with an admissions counselor, because if they ask for that information, or, you're talking about a class, then you can actually show them the document that they're going to be seeing on your application. And that might be useful for them. Have some goals for the interview going in, and this will kind of help you to be prepared. This is a little bit more of that mental preparation, but think about are there like 3 main points that you want someone to know about you. Like if someone walked away from meeting with you, and you want them to say, wow, like that student was so motivated, and this is an example of why, and I can see them being motivated on campus. Like if that's the theme you want them to come away with, then make sure that as you're thinking about the questions you're being asked and what you're talking about, that you are kind of fulfilling those objectives. Big tip here, if the interviewer asks at the end, do you have any questions? Always, always, always have questions. This is kind of separate, but we were actually conducting job interviews for Salve. We were hiring an admissions counselor. And one of this interview is basically going to determine if the person was going to go on to a second round. And at the end, we asked, do you have any questions? And they said no. And for all of us on that interview committee, that was instantly, well, that person's not going to go on to the next round. If they're not showing interest, if they can't think of a couple of questions, they're probably not a good fit for us. So you always want to have some backup questions. Even if you feel like all of your questions have been answered, come in there prepared with a few that you can ask. If you're really, kind of panicking and you can't think of anything, just ask the person about their experience. And you can always, kind of have that default question. Make sure that you're dressed appropriately. You don't have to overdress, but, be professional, treat it like it's a serious thing. And of course, being early is being on time for these interviews. You don't want to, again, be stressed about getting there right around the time that it's starting. You want to get there a little bit early, and feel good about that. Even if you're super early and you're just sitting in the car, that you have that time to kind of ground yourself and get ready going in. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some strategies for some typical interview questions that you might receive. So first off, you might get questions about your academic experience and your interests. The purpose of these questions is basically to determine, can you handle the rigor of college? Are you going to be ready to get to college, hit the ground running? You're not going to struggle in the classroom academically. So the strategy here is to know your transcript, know what some of those, kind of red flags might be. If someone's reading your transcript and they see some grades that are below average on that transcript, be ready to talk about that. Talk about why with those grades. Know your strengths and what excites you academically, what maybe challenges you, how you want to grow through that. And as I mentioned before, showing the interviewer that you might know some specifics about their departments and their programs. What is the name of the college that you're applying to within the university? If they have separate colleges like Schools of Art and Science, or the Olin College of Engineering or something. Knowing the specific name of the major. At Salve, we don't call it criminal justice, we call it administration of justice. So kind of just showing the interviewer that you've done a little bit of that research. So some of these questions that kind of relate to this, you might get, how's your year going? What classes are you taking? Tell me about your favorite class. If you could change one thing about your school, what would it be? Tell me about your favorite teacher. So, kind of being prepared for questions like that. Next, you might have questions about your extracurricular involvement. And this, we don't just want to admit academic robots to our colleges. We don't just want students that are going to hit the books and just be studying all day. We want students that are going to contribute to our community. Students that are engaged, students that are involved in a lot of things. That is the best predictor of resilience in college and of sticking with it and not, transferring out. So especially colleges that do a quote unquote holistic evaluation, they're not only looking at the transcript and the grades. They want to understand the whole you. They're going to want to know about what you're involved in, outside of school, and what you do to contribute to the communities that you're a part of. So again, maybe if you've made that resume in advance, you've had that time to self-reflect, you've thought a little bit about your activities. And when you list those activities out, think about how is that activity meaningful to you? So, maybe you were involved in a walk to raise money for cancer research. And maybe you started as a participant in the first year of high school, and then in the second year you volunteered to be on the committee, and then maybe the third year of high school you actually led that committee and you led that initiative. So beyond just like, oh, I spent this amount of hours doing this activity and we raised this amount of money, really thinking about how is that meaningful to you? What skills did you learn through that? Did you develop as a leader? Did it teach you a little bit about time management and organization, and how to fundraise, how to put yourself out there and ask for money, and how to organize people in a community around a common purpose? So, kind of thinking about what's the meaning behind those activities. Identify ways you'd like to be involved and contribute to the college community. So again, this is a good opportunity to look at the list of activities that school is offering, the clubs, and maybe how some that kind of match up with what you're doing now or what you'd like to be involved in, and just being able to share that excitement of why you're interested in that. So some, sample questions related to this, you might get, what extracurricular activities are you involved in? What do you do for fun in your free time? How can you see yourself getting involved in college? Tell me about your work experience. Maybe you have some job experience. I think sometimes students stress a little bit about activities if they're not involved in a ton of clubs in high school, and that's okay, because if you have experience working in a job, or experience taking care of siblings, or maybe having household responsibilities, those are all just as valid as clubs and organizations, especially if you can kind of sell what that impact of that activity had on you and how it changed you as a person and makes you more prepared for college. You might get questions about your background, your values, your worldview. Especially I think about colleges that are very mission driven. Maybe you're applying to a Christian affiliated college, and maybe it's a college that has a statement of faith. Salve does not have any requirements like that. We're open to all backgrounds and beliefs, but there are colleges out there that, want students to kind of reflect on, their faith and that sort of thing. So whether it's something really formal like that, or just thinking about, what are three values that I hold dear in my life, being able to kind of share that information. So, and not being surprised if someone asks you that question. The purpose of this is we want to know what's important to you. We want to know what makes you tick. Are you going to be, an active contributor on campus? Are you going to help make our community a better place? Or are you just going to kind of be along for the ride? If you can show that you're a student that likes to be involved, and maybe it doesn't mean you have to be the most outgoing person in the world, but that you like to join in and that you're eager for some of these leadership opportunities, that's really valuable for the process. So definitely read the mission statement of the college that you're interviewing for. You should do this for all the colleges that are on your list, especially if you're interviewing there. And think about how your personal values connect with the mission statement of that institution. So at Salve, we say that we want students that are going to make the world a little bit more just, harmonious, and merciful. So if a student talked about what some of their personal values are and how that relates to our mission, I would be very impressed by that. I would want to admit that student right away. So definitely be ready to talk about those things. So some sample questions here. You might get, what is an issue facing your generation today? What's a favorite book? What are you reading? How would your friends describe you? Why are you applying to our university? And of course, the dreaded, tell me about yourself. That question really can trip students up. That also trips, I think, anyone up for any kind of interview. So be prepared for someone to ask you, tell me about yourself. And again, think about maybe just what are 1 to 3 things that I would want that person to know And be ready just to say that, and be consistent with it throughout the interview, so that you don't get caught off guard if you have that kind of question. Okay, so here are some tips to having a successful interview. You want to be able to have a conversation with that interviewer. This should be a conversation. This should be a two-way street. So, of course, you're going to be receiving a lot of questions. And I mentioned in the beginning that you want to be ready to ask questions at the end if someone says, do you have questions? But while you're describing the answer to something, it's okay if you ask, if that brings up another question, if you want to ask a question. You might not want to do that for every single answer, but showing that you have curiosity, I think is always a good thing. Try to, maybe practice interviewing with some folks. And if you find that a lot of your answers are kind of, one-dimensional, kind of that like, yes, no, yes, I did that kind of answer, maybe practice a little bit on how can I kind of tell a bit more of a story? How can I give some more specifics or examples that relate to that, and show my enthusiasm with that? You want to be someone that we would like to continue to know. My boss likes to say you want to be interested and interesting. And I think a way to be interesting is to show interest, to show enthusiasm, to have questions that are ready to go. You want to have a good understanding of what your capabilities are now and where and how you'd like to grow in college, so that enthusiasm shines through in what you're talking about. Let's see, anything else here I wanted to mention? And we talked about having specific questions in mind, right? So, okay, so this is kind of an example of building an answer, kind of taking something, a little bit to the next level. So, one question might be, tell me about your favorite class. So an okay answer to that might be, I really like biology because the labs are fun. That's fine. That answer doesn't hurt. But I'm not really getting as much enthusiasm there. I'm not really getting a lot of specifics. It's a bit of like a flat one-dimensional answer. A better way to respond to that might be, I like biology because I can take what I'm learning in the classroom and apply it in the real world. Okay, so now I kind of get some of the purpose behind why you like biology, but I would love an example. Like, what do you mean by that? So then I think kind of a even better answer to this might be, I like biology because of the experiential learning component, and I would one day like to work in environmental science as an ornithologist. I hope to take a class with Dr. Chase sometime. I see he runs a bird banding program. So you mentioned your motivation, you mentioned a potential career that relates to this. So you've done some research there. You've also shown that you've done research because you mentioned the specific name of a faculty at my university. And you even know a program that faculty is involved in. So that answer really takes it to the next level. So you want to make sure that you're having some complex answers, that you're providing some examples, that it's not just that flat, couple of words reaction to something. Here's another one. What do you do in your free time? So, an okay answer might be, I really like doing community service. A better answer could be, I like doing community service because I like giving back and serving others. And an even better answer would be, I like to volunteer because I enjoy giving back and helping to make our community a better place. I'm very interested in going to a school that has a culture of volunteerism, and I would like to hear more about your service plunge opportunities. So, like I mentioned before, you can ask a question when you're giving an answer. And again, that shows that enthusiasm that you have. Here's a little bit more of advice for that tell me about yourself question. I think it's really helpful to think about what are your core values. So if someone asks you, like, what are three words that describe you, what would you be ready to say something? So you can just kind of Google core values. You can Google, examples of values, and you'll see lots of different words, and that might, give you some ideas if you're kind of struggling right away to come up with that. Once you have those values, have a few examples of them ready to go. What's an example of dedication, if that's one of the words that you've chosen? and then kind of being able to put it all together into a comprehensive sentence, maybe practice it a few times, so that that reader, or not the reader, so that the interviewer comes away feeling like, wow, the student really knows their self, and they really know what they want to get out of the college experience. And that will really make you stand up, because a lot of students get tripped up by the, just tell me about yourself question. Okay, so you've had a successful interview, you were prepared, you asked great questions, you gave comprehensive answers, you made this great relationship with the admissions counselor. Now you want to maintain that, you want to follow up. So I think it's really helpful to send a thank you note to whoever did your interview. Email's fine. If you can write a card, that's even better. But do whatever is natural for you and makes sense. But this is sort of like a continuation of the interview. It's showing that you are continuing to be interested. Maybe you thought of a follow-up question, so that's probably better for an email. But those cards are always appreciated. Whenever I receive a card from a student, I kind of like save it in a drawer, and I think it's a drawer. Sorry, my New Jersey's coming out, right, Carly? I save it in a drawer, and I like to be able to kind of open that at the end of the season and kind of look back, and you kind of get a sense of the impact that you had that year. So I think that's kind of just a nice touch. Here's some resources that you can Google. You can look up the 160 plus interview questions from top universities if you want a lot of reading, but there's some great questions there. I mentioned Googling those core values to kind of help to be self-reflective. I really like the college essay guy. We're not affiliated with him, Ethan Sawyer, but I think he has really nice advice for students. And so if you like podcasts, he has one called College Interview Tips and Tricks. And I think he has some nice examples there to be prepared. And the College Board has some practice questions and strategies that you can go through as well. And I think that will, again, help you to kind of practice in advance and get some experience before you even do the interview. So you can go in there a little bit more confident. I think we do have some time now to go over family support and ways that parents or guardians can support their students. So here's just a couple, do's and don'ts for families. Be prepared with questions. So, if you know your student very well, you might be able to give them some ideas of questions that they can ask in the interview. Maybe if you can help them to do a practice interview, you can kind of flesh out some of those answers that they have to questions. Maybe your student's not thinking about something that was really interesting and really help them to grow. And you can kind of help them to reflect on that. So, that's a great way to be a cheerleader for your student, to be an advocate for them, to really help them with the process. If you are in the physical space with the student, if you're invited to be a participant, well, let's say you're not sure if you're invited. Maybe the student's invited to the interview, but it doesn't say whether or not families are invited. Maybe drop them off, come with them, be an observer at first, make sure your phone is off. But you could always ask, would you like me to be a part of this? Usually, if a parent comes with the student to our interviews, we try to have a few minutes, with the student, like one-on-one, so they can ask questions, but then we invite the parents to come in at the end. So just be flexible and ready to do that. Staying positive, and really trying not to speak for your student or answer questions for them. And again, helping your student practice. I think that's probably one of the best ways that you can be useful in this experience. One tip is try not to use we statements. I think sometimes parents don't realize they're doing that, but you really want to let the student drive the experience. So you don't want to say we have a 3.5. No, your student has a 3.5. So let the student take control. Sometimes, parents are busy, but, if you are invited to the space, you don't want to make that space distracting if you're kind of working in the background or taking calls or that kind of thing. And, try not to bring anything negative up. The discussion about cost and affordability, again, a lot of that is not always in the control of the admissions counselor. And so, being able to ask general questions, but, maybe not like flooding the interviewer with statements like, well, if we can't afford it, that's it. We're not going to go, blah, blah, blah. Just let the process kind of play out. And those conversations can kind of come up later. But maybe being ready to talk about average net costs, or, are there special scholarships that your family might qualify for, or things like that. So I think those are all the main points that I wanted to get to. I think we still have 5 minutes left. So I would love to take your questions if you have any questions. And I'm just going to leave my contact information on the screen here as well, while you're typing in the chat.
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions, or if there's anything you'd like to ask in the chat too. John, I see you raising your hand. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, so no one is guaranteed an interview, right? It's just like if you're selected after the first stage of the admission process.
Yeah. So not every college is going to offer the ability to interview. One piece of advice I would say is as you think about your college list, you literally should have a list, right? So I think it's useful to have some kind of spreadsheet, maybe like a Google sheet that you can even share with other people. But, maybe you have the big list earlier in high school, and then in senior year, you have a tab, and that's like your actual list of colleges that you're applying to. And you can have details on there, like the application deadlines, if they offer interviews, who does the interview, and most importantly, who your admissions counselor is. So looking that up on the website. If it's not listed for some reason, maybe emailing the admissions office and asking who your counselor is, and then trying to make sure that you have some kind of contact with that admissions counselor for all of the colleges that you're applying to. So if you're applying to 12 colleges, trying to make sure that you are reaching out to that admissions representative for each of those colleges. If they offer interviews, that's great. You should do one. I would definitely suggest doing one if it's available to you. Because of all the reasons that we mentioned before. But even if they don't offer interviews, you can still ask questions over the internet. You might still be able to have like an informal conversation with them, or they might be able to connect you with like a student or somebody else. So definitely trying to make contact in some way, but the interview is like probably the best way to make contact with an admissions rep, because it's the most amount of time that you'll get with them.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? There's still a couple minutes until the next session if anyone has any questions. All right, well, I'll hang out for a little bit if anyone has any additional questions they'd like to ask. But thank you so much. This was such a good presentation. I learned things from it, so I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Nick.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for attending tonight. And you're all going to do a fabulous job with interviews, but you can always reach out if you have any questions. And I'm going to post my information here one more time again. But if you're watching a recording of this, and for some reason, if you don't have the transcript, you can also just Google me, Nick Albanese with Salve Regina, and my information is on the website.
Awesome. Thank you. I hope everyone has a good rest of their night.